Welcome. My name is Konstantinos Travlos, and I am an instructor of political science at Great Basin College and a postdoctoral researcher affiliated with the University of the Peloponnese. The paper that we are going to present here is co-authored with Dr. Ioannis Nioutsikos of the University of the Peloponnese, PhD candidate Magdalini Daskalopoulou, also of the University of the Peloponnese. The paper is part of a larger research project that is supported by the Hellenic Foundation for Research and Innovation under the second call for HFRI research projects to support postdoctoral researchers, project number 00789, Arcade. The title of the specific presentation is Breaking the Stalemate in the Study of the Relationship of Mutual Military Buildups, Arms Races, and Militarized Disputes. The Greece-Turkey Ottoman Empire cases. The goal of our broader research program is to explore the relationship between mutual military buildups, arms races, militarized interstate disputes, and the onset of war within the Greek-Ottoman Empire and Greece-Turkish Republic interstate dyads. But as a more general goal, we want to use these as case studies, as essentially proof of concept models for a method for conducting research in the relationship between mutual military buildups and arms races that will address a stalemated literature on the association between these four concepts. This literature is made of three distinct groups of scholarly work: the conflict processes quantitative work based on the correlates of war data, the econometric arms race literature, and the qualitative arms race literature. We seek to promote our goal by focusing on a specific case study, the Greece-Ottoman Empire and Greece-Turkey interstate dyads, which we treat as one case based on the idea of interrupted rivalry, a concept developed by Rutkiewicz, Deal, and Travlos in 2013, and the reality of the legal continuity between the Republic of Turkey and the Ottoman Empire from the point of view of international law. This is also the case of how the Ottoman Empire and the Turkish Republic are treated in many of our main conflict data databases as essentially one entity. For example, in the correlates of war databases or the Alliance Treaty Obligations Provisions database. We wish to show an example of the stalemate of existing approaches to the study of the relationship between mutual military buildups, arms races, MIDs, and war, and propose a novel way to locate statistical mutual military buildups that provides more nuance and a better foundation for then locating qualitative arms races. Our argument is that providing a more nuanced and richer way for locating mutual military buildups in interstate dyads will provide to qualitative scholars that look into arms races, which is a qualitative concept in our mind because it is inexorably tied to concepts of motivation, which are very hard to quantify. Having a more nuanced approach to locating MMBs provides better focus for those scholarly studies that then will decide whether those mutual military buildups were arms races or not. Let us discuss a bit the stalemate we're talking about. And when it comes to the conflict processes in quantitative mutual military buildup literature, there is consilience on the use of the concept of strategic rivalry as a proxy for motivations that render mutual military buildups to arms races. This was established by Gibler, Ryder, and Hutchinson in 2005. Now, there's a problem with this. It takes too broad an assumption that mutual military buildups, which is a statistical quantitative concept, are arms races, which is a motivational qualitative concept due to the presence of strategic rivalry. But strategic rivalry is simply too broad a concept to capture variation, and something that does not vary cannot explain something that varies. Using our case as an example, the Greece-Ottoman Empire Turkey strategic rivalries lasted a century or half centuries. The first one from 1828 to 1925, the second one from 1956 to 2023. Assuming that all statistical mutual military buildups that arise in this huge period of time are automatically arms races because they arise in the context of strategic rivalry might be a bit too quick an assumption. There's also a lack of theory to explain the influence of arms races on war onset that hobbles further research within this literature. This was pointed out by Sample in 1997 and Dil Ekrezensi in 1998. Indeed, the possibility of the independence of mutual military buildups and their effect on war onset from that of rivalry has also been indicated by the work of Sample in 2002, which further casts into doubt the ease of using strategic rivalry as a proxy for motivations. When it comes to the econometric literature on arms races, in the Greek-Turkish case, it has exhausted any usefulness according to Brouwer's 2002 quite large survey of that literature. And in general, that seems to be the case in general for the econometric literature according to Mitchell and Pickering 2017. Let's give some specific examples of problems of the existing literature when it comes to this specific case. The conflict process quantitative literature, despite the 170 years of rivalry, 4 interstate wars in 1897, 1912, 1917, and 1919, and at least 1 confirmed qualitative arms race. This is the Dreadnought race of 1912, 1917. You can read more about it in Fotakis 2005 and Aksakal 2008. Only some confused indicators of a mutual military buildup exist in that literature, either in 1975, 1978, or 1934, 1936, or none at all. One exception to this is the Kulis, Merhel, and Ifandis piece from 2021, which does not exactly fit with that conflict processes quantitative literature, but does make an attempt to tie military buildups in the air force sectors of the 2 countries with the onset of militarized interstate disputes. When it comes to the econometric arms race literature, despite a focus on a data-rich post-1960 period, there are confused and contradictory findings. On balance, there is support for some kind of arms race in the 1960s, 1980s period, and that Greece reacts to Turkish military spending, but there are also many papers within that literature that don't see any arms race, see various arms races within that period with interruptions and so on, and cannot decide or cannot find conclusive evidence whether it's one country reacting to the other or there is an action-reaction process. This is one of the reasons why Brouwer declared that there is diminishing returns in the continuation of this research program until new theories are brought forward that connect arms races to conflict onset. Our solution to overcome the stalemate is in a way very simple. We synthesize elements of the existing literature to build a guideline for locating mutual military buildups within dyads. Those mutual military buildups can then be used for 2 purposes: quantitative analysis of association with conflict processes and qualitative analysis that seek to clarify which mutual military buildups were also characterized by arms race motivations and which were not. In another name, we embrace a concept that all arms races are mutual military buildups, but not all mutual military buildups are arms races, and make it a central goal of qualitative research to essentially clarify between the statistical and the motivational element of this association. This follows the logic that all wars start as militarized interstate disputes, but not all militarized interstate disputes become war. We will use the case study as proof of concept. More specifically, to overcome the stalemate, we combine 2 insights from existing literature: the importance of rivalry from the conflict processes literature, and the importance of accounting for subsistence military spending from the econometric arms race literature. Rivalry levers, based now on the Gorge Deal and Ballas 2016 peace scale, instead of proxying for motivation, permit us to address differentiation in subsistence military spending. We assume that more acute periods of rivalry, severe versus lesser, lesser versus negative peace, are associated with general increases of military subsistence spending due to more acute perceptions of threat. But that does not necessarily mean a mutual military buildup. A mutual military buildup is a contemporaneous extraordinary military expenditure for both states above subsistence level. What we're essentially trying to say here is that we agree with the rivalry literature that acute perceptions of threat lead to increases of military spending by states. But that in a way also increases the threshold after which the threshold for which has to be passed in order for military spending to essentially create the conditions, trigger the conditions that tend to lead to mutual military buildups and then tend to give rise to arms race motivations. In another name, in the absence of strength, it is much more of conflict, of rivalry. It is much more easier for states to be shocked into an arms race. But in the presence of rivalry and already high levels of military subsistence pending because of the higher threat perceptions, it takes a lot more to shock states into an arms race. Thus, we need to locate subsistence levels first. And our solution is to take the average annual rate of change in military expenditures of each dyad member per rivalry period. Essentially, we calculate the annual rate of change in military expenditures, and then we average it by rivalry periods. Instead of taking the whole rivalry period as a strategic rivalry period, we essentially break it down to its peace scale components and average and calculate an average military expenditures rate of change within each rivalry period. Any annual rate of change above that average, above that rivalry period average, is possibly the result of extraordinary expenditures more likely to trigger the kind of motivational and psychological processes that are associated with the concept of an arms race. If both dyad members engage in such above rivalry period average expenditures in a contemporaneous manner, then we have a possible mutual military buildup. To calculate this, we use the military expenditures, correlates of war, national military capabilities data, and military expenditures per military personnel capital. The second variable, military expenditures per military personnel capital, per military personnel capita, is based on similar measures in the econometric arms race literature to capture expenditures in training, doctrine, etc. Essentially a proxy for qualitative increases. We built two versions of the mutual military buildup variable, one focusing on 3-year sets. We have a mutual military buildup in majority of dyad years in 3-year sets were characterized by above rivalry period average expenditures for both dyad members. And then we also do it as a 5-year set. There is no a priori theoretical reason why we choose the 3 years and 5-year sets. It's just an arbitrary decision with the goal of providing a more robust testing. We then calculated independently the presence or absence of mutual military buildups using both types of the variable and both types of the duration variable, and with 95% intercodal reliability, we concluded in the following results. First of all, when it comes to average rate of change by rivalry period and based on military expenditures per capita, we see that in general, our average per rivalry period numbers make sense theoretically according to what we know about rivalry. Periods of lesser rivalry or negative peace have lower average period rates of change in military expenditure than periods of more acute rivalry like severe rivalry. Having those numbers then, we calculate for each state the annual rate of change in military expenditures and military expenditures per military personnel capita, and we locate the extraordinary cases, and then we see if those are contemporaneous. Generally speaking, we find that in the lesser rivalry period of 1828 to 1865, there was a period of mutual military buildup somewhere between 1855 to 1863. There is some variation depending on of the endpoints and start points depending on the variable used. In the severe rivalry period of 1866 to 1924, we only found very weak support for the existence of a mutual military buildup from 1910 to 1913. We found no mutual military buildup indicators in the lesser rivalry period of 1925 to 1930. We found consistent mutual military buildup somewhere between 1933 to 1942. The endpoints and start points again changed depending on the mutual military buildup variable used. And another one, and weaker indicators from 1950 to 1956. Finally, in the severe rivalry period from 1957 to 2016, where our data was available, we find, generally speaking, strong support for two periods of mutual military buildups, one roughly from 1966 to 1981. Again, the start and end date might change depending on the variable used. And from 1987 to 2009, roughly, or the late 1990s, again, depending on the variable used. Finally, we found some indicators of also a mutual military buildup from 2004 to 2007, with some variations depending on the variable used. So average rates of change per rivalry period map well with explanatory framework expectations, higher in severe rivalry periods. Compared to conflict process literature, we locate one extra mutual military buildup period in the 19th century that was invisible before, the one between roughly 1855 to 1863. Largely, our findings agree with theirs for the 1866-1956 period, with a 10 years 1910-1913 mutual military buildup indicator, which would partly include the dreadnought arms race. I remind that no such MMB was found in the previous studies. We have stable findings of mutual military buildups in the 1956-2060 period in agreement with the econometric literature, but more clarity of specific periods. And essentially, we have produced a more nuanced and richer picture of variation in mutual military buildups within the context of variation of rivalry intensity. Now, the question is, was this worth it? Is this novel approach to locating mutual military buildups useful from a scholarly point of view? Well, we do not conduct full quantitative studies of the association of mutual military buildups with MID onset in this paper. That is a work in progress with the next paper within the general program. We did do a first glance at associations between MID onsets and the presence of mutual military buildups. The summary of the findings, and the range covers the lowest and strongest contemporaneity that we were able to find. There's going to be a lot of variation depending on which of the four mutual military buildups variables we use. Is that in the lesser rivalry from 1828 to 1865, of the three military interstate disputes, 1 to 2 follow a mutual military buildup period. The severe rivalry period of 1866 to 1924, of 14 military interstate disputes, 0 to 1 take place during a mutual military buildup period, and 0 to 1 follows a mutual military buildup period. In the severe rivalry of 1957 to 2016, the 28 militarized interstate disputes, 14 to 23 militarized interstate disputes take place during mutual military buildup periods, and 5 to 11 follow mutual military buildup periods. So when it comes to the lesser rivalry period and the severe rivalry, the modern severe rivalry period, there seems to be some association between the onset of MIDs and the presence of mutual military buildups. But when it comes to the severe rivalry period of 1866 to 1924, interestingly, there seems to be very little association. What can we conclude from this? The new method produces results in accordance with existing findings, but also updates them, including previously missed information. Thus, we can argue that it is a progressive shift in the study of mutual military buildups and their association with MIDs. The lack of mutual military buildups in the 1866-1925 period and overlap with MID onset and lack of overlap with MID onset is perplexing. The period saw 4 wars, at least one qualitative arms race. One solution, one way to address this is to look for expenditures and data on land and naval force expenditures. In another name, open the black box of expenditures, which is something that is explored by qualitative works in progress by research project team members. Another potential explanation is the role of major powers in dampening conflict spirals, which is explored in our current quantitative and qualitative work in progress by research project team members. And there's also the potential role of multiple rivalries, with Russia for the Ottoman Empire, Bulgaria for Greece, as well as the general economic weakness of both states, which might result in the diffusing of periods of above average expenditures, making temporal overlap less likely. We explore this a bit in our current qualitative working project by research project teams. There is an interesting unanticipated finding. The 1855 to 1863 mutual military buildup presages the escalation of the lesser rivalry of 1828-1865 to the severe rivalry of 1866 to 1924. This fits well with Valeriano's 2003 argument about the role of mutual military buildups and arms races in rivalry escalation. We explore this finding further in the current work in progress and find very strong support that the main role of mutual military buildups in that early lesser rivalry period was to essentially shock the rivalry to higher intensity, to transition from the lesser rivalry to the severe rivalry. This was unanticipated, but we believe it is a very excellent finding that is in support with an important argument within the rivalry literature. Future work beyond the works in progress. Qualitative method research and potential arms race motivations during the mutual military buildup periods we found. Secondly, quantitative method research within the steps to war framework of association between mutual military buildups and MID onset in the case study. And three, coding other dyads using these methods to conduct cross-panel research. In this appendix, we present another variation in our operationalization of mutual military buildups. In this case, we dispensed with essentially the idea of above average expenditures compared to the average rivalry period rate of change, and instead focused on continuous, in general, increases in military expenditures and military expenditures per capita. This produces a lot more mutual military buildups in the severe rivalry period, though we have no theoretical reason to code the variable this way. This was just done out of scientific curiosity, and we do not consider these findings to be part of the main argument of our research program. That said, it might be of interest to various people who are interested in our project, so we present them in this slide. Thank you very much, and we will present future videos about the other papers that are done in the general OrcID program.